All right, welcome to our last podcast of Unit 3, The Rise of European Governments. We'll see three new developments between 1450 and 1750, the rise of nation-states, the rise of the absolute monarchy, and the rise of a limited monarchy. This is all due to the early Reformation, a little bit of the Renaissance, the spread of new religions, which means new ideas. You get the idea. In 1500, the Catholic Church, which was benefiting from European prosperity, thank you, Renaissance, was building a series of new churches. One of them was St. Peter's Basilica. Built in Rome, very nice dome, decorated beautifully inside, cost a lot of money. So Pope Leo X raised money for the new basilica by authorizing the sale of indulgences, which essentially means you can buy your way into heaven. The German monk, Martin Luther, had a problem with this. He actually wasn't originally a monk. He was a law student. And one day he got struck by lightning. And as he lay on the ground, twitching, he prayed to, I believe it was St. Anne, that if he lived, he would dedicate his life to religion. And he lived, so he ended up becoming a monk. But he challenged the Pope on the issue of indulgences. And then as he studied the church and religion more, he began challenging other practices that he considered corrupt and not Christian. Luther began what's called the Protestant Reformation, arguing that salvation could be attained by faith alone, and not by deeds like the purchasing of indulgences. He further argued that the Christian belief could not be based on the Bible and on Christian tradition, not on the authority of the Pope. So he's arguing Christian belief should be based on the Bible and on tradition, not the authority of the Pope. And you have to understand that the Catholic Church was becoming very corrupt at this time. It was really the only church in Western Europe. The Protestant leader, John Calvin, formulated a rather different theological perspective. And he wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion. And Calvin argued that salvation was God's gift to those who were predestined, and that Christian congregations should be self-governing and stress simplicity in life and in worship. Hence, churches were pretty bare, and Calvinists dressed in simple black attire. The Protestant Reformation appealed not only to religious sentiments, but also to Luther's fellow Germans, and to peasants and urban workers who wanted to reject the religion of their masters. So study this for just a moment. This is going to give you a breakdown of what religions are like in 1555. So this is very shortly, this is within 55 years, guys, of Martin Luther beginning his Reformation. So he does quite a bit. Everything in blue is Roman Catholic, but Lutheranism really spread in the Holy Roman Empire, which is where Germany would, well, part of Germany would be, a couple of heirs. And it's really going to spread into Scandinavia. England, the Church of England, Calvinists would reach Scotland. Ireland will remain Catholic. All right. So in looking at the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church agreed on a number of internal reforms, but also a reaffirmation of fundamental Catholic beliefs at the Council of Trent. And these responses to the Protestant Reformation, along with the activities of the newly established Society of Jesus, aka the Jesuits, compromised the Catholic Reformation. And guys, I'm going to be honest with you, the Council of Trent, there really weren't a lot of internal reforms being made, but essentially it's the traditional beliefs were being upheld and the sale of indulgences was looked at. The Protestant Reformation would lead to a number of wars on religion. The last of them concluded in 1648. And these included not just wars between different countries, but civil wars and conflicts between different parts of empires. The Reformation led to some very fundamental changes in the relationship of church and state. And some rulers, like Henry VIII, created an entirely new church, the Church of England, and made himself the supreme head. Others, like Henry IV of France, accepted religious plurality. Henry issued what's called the Edict of Nantes, which gave Huguenots, French Protestants, freedom of conscience and allowed them to worship in many places of the kingdom, just not Paris. I will spend quite a bit of time talking about Henry VIII, his 6 wives, and the revolution that occurred in England with the breaking away of the Catholic Church and the formation of the Church of England. It's really fascinating, and I promise you, you will enjoy that discussion. Between 1516 and 1519, Charles of Burgundy, who was a descendant of the Austrian Habsburg family, inherited the thrones of Castile and Aragon, as well as their colonial empires. Uh-oh, guys. In addition, he inherited the Austrian Habsburg possessions and the position of Holy Roman Emperor. OMG. Charles, guys, was able to forge a coalition to defeat the Ottomans at the gates of Vienna in 1529. But he was unable to unify his many territorial possessions. So this is a guy who is going to become Charles the First of Spain and Charles the Fifth, the Holy Roman Emperor. This guy has a lot of power. This is going to lead to some problems, though. Lutheran German princes rebelled against the French-speaking Catholic Charles. They seized church lands and gave rise to the German Wars of Religion. And this would actually end with the Peace of Augsburg, which essentially said that princes of the small kingdoms of the Holy Roman Empire were allowed to pick their own religion. Most of them chose Lutheranism. When Charles abdicated the throne in 1556, Spain went to his brother Philip, while a weakened Holy Roman Empire went to his brother Ferdinand. So the Habsburg family has a lot of power. They're going to be in royal houses all over Europe. This is where you also get the famous Habsburg jawline that we will discuss later. Meanwhile, the rulers of Spain, France, and England would pursue their own efforts at political unification, often at the expense of the common people, somebody else's country, and then other countries' empires. This would lead to the rise of what's called the absolute monarchy. And a great example off the bat would be Louis XIV. He was called the Sun King, and he believed that the monarch personified the state. He was actually named king at age 4. His life motto, I'm not even going to try that, but I am the state. He limited the power of nobility and the Catholic Church by increasing the size of the French bureaucracy. He introduced the idea of mercantilism, which was used to increase the wealth of France. Monarchs, being him, controlled trade, and he was aided by his finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Colonies in North America and India were established, and using the profits, the Sun King built what was called the Palace of Versailles. In order to balance that out, because if you're going to use your profits, you got to get those profits back somehow. He required the nobles to live there, and that's how he essentially paid back the profits. The palace was used as a symbol of French wealth and power. Daily routines at Versailles and access to the king were exploited by Louis XIV. The nobility competed against each other to perform not only menial tasks, but things that I would call unfortunate. So there were roles that one could play, such as master of the wardrobe. I would have fun with that. You're essentially picking out the king's outfits every day. But then there was what's called the master of the privy, aka the master of the stool. And this person's job was to literally help the king on and off the version of the toilet, which was basically a nice chair with a pot underneath, and then to check the king's residual waste to ensure he was in good health. So if you ever think your job's crappy, it could be worse. I'll pause that so you can chuckle at the terrible history puns that are made here. Speaking of absolute monarchs, look at this. Henry VIII. So these are some major British players that we're going to be looking at when we're talking about absolute power versus a limited monarchy. William and Mary, they're really your first constitutional monarchs. How they get there is because of absolute monarchs. We'll be talking about Elizabeth, Queen Mary, Charles II, James, as well as Henry VIII and his 6 wives, all of whom played a role in the wars of religion. All right. Constant warfare in the early modern Europe led to a military revolution in which cannon muskets and common foot soldiers became the mainstays of European armies. Armies grew in size, and most European states maintained standing armies, except for England, which maintained a standing navy. I mean, that makes sense. To manage the large standing armies and to use troops more effectively in battle, Europeans devised new command structures, signal techniques, and marching drills. This is very important when you're introducing the new technology of cannons and muskets. Development in naval technology during this period included warships with multiple tiers of cannons, the four-wheel cannon, and carriages that made reloading easier. England took the lead in the development of new naval technology, and this power was demonstrated when the English Royal Navy defeated Spain's Armada in 1588. This actually signaled the end of Spain's military dominance in Europe, as well as let the world know, do not mess with England's navy. With the defeat of Spain, France rose as the strongest power on continental Europe. Its rival, England, held superiority in naval power. And to this day, England has one of the, if not the strongest navy in the world. During the War of the Spanish Succession, England, which was allied with Austria and Prussia, were able to prevent the French House of Bourbon from taking over the Spanish throne. With the War of Spanish Succession, you don't want any countries becoming too powerful. So the War of Spanish Succession, the four powers of Europe, France, Britain, Austria, and Russia, were able to maintain a balance of power that prevented any one country from becoming too strong for about 2 centuries. The rise of the bourgeois occurred because Europe's cities experienced spectacular growth between 1500 and 1700. The wealthy urban bourgeois class thrived on manufacturing, trade, finance, and part of this includes the very profitable trade in grain. Amsterdam's growth in particular was built on trade and finance and exemplified the power of 17th century bourgeois enterprise. The bourgeois were middle-class people that were fine businessmen and made a lot of money, but they're not nobles. They did, however, forge mutually beneficial relationships with monarchs, and they built extensive family and ethnic networks to facilitate trade throughout different parts of the world. They gradually increased their ownership of land, and many entered the ranks of nobility by marrying into noble families, or you could actually purchase titles of nobility, and some of them were in fact that wealthy. Partnerships between merchants and governments led to the development of what's called joint stock companies, as well as stock exchanges. Governments played a key role in the improvement of Europe's transportation and infrastructure. The Anglo-Dutch Wars of the 17th century provided evidence of the growing importance of trade in international affairs. Now, we've talked about religion quite a bit, but let's talk about beyond religion and how that impacts aspects of everyday life. European concepts of the natural world were derived from local religion and folk customs. People believed that natural events could have supernatural causes. So in other words, cows don't just drop dead one day. It's because somebody put a spell on them. The drought isn't because there's no rain. It's because somebody, probably a woman, put a spell out somewhere. And this is what's going to lead to the witch trials. Belief in the supernatural is vividly demonstrated in the witch hunts of the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Over 100,000 people, and 3/4 of them were women, were tried. Half of them were executed on charges of witchcraft. Typically, the people who were being hunted as witches were different. These were people who were independent, but perhaps had careers that were not seen as desirable. You see this in the Salem witch trials. All of the people who are targeted, there's something different about them. One of them is a beggar woman. One of them owns the tavern. Reasons for the witch hunts are many, but at the bottom was the tension between traditional beliefs and new religion and political institutions. So you got a problem with somebody, accuse them of being a witch. The water tests Most people didn't know how to swim, so if they tossed you in the water and you swam, you were a witch. If they tossed you in the water and you drowned, you were innocent, but oh well, you got to go to heaven, so it's okay that you're dead. That's fine. We all know it's true. All right. And finally, the scientific revolution. European intellectuals derived their understanding of the natural world from the writings of the Greeks and Romans. And these writings suggested that everything on Earth was reducible to 4 elements: that the sun, moon, planets, and stars were so light and pure they floated in crystalline spheres and rotated around the Earth in perfectly circular orbits. The observations of Copernicus, though, and other scientists later on down the road, like Galileo, would undermine this Earth centered model of the universe. And this would lead to the introduction of the Copernican sun centered model, heliocentric, where the sun is the center of the universe and everything revolves around that. Copernicus kept his mouth shut, though, because he knew what would happen. Galileo did not. Galileo was almost killed. He was excommunicated and sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life when he said, hey, y'all, the Earth is not the center of the universe. It's actually the sun. Nobody wanted to hear that, though. So, yeah. The Copernican model was initially criticized and suppressed by Protestant leaders and the Catholic Church. But despite this opposition, printed books spread and other scientific ideas began spreading around Europe, particularly among the intellectuals of Europe. This is where you have people like Isaac Newton, who discovered the law of gravity, and it showed how natural laws govern all physical objects. Newton's discoveries led to the development of Newtonian physics. However, Newton and other scientists did not believe that their discoveries were in conflict with religious belief. Unfortunately, they are some of the only ones. All right, changing gears a little bit and talking about the Russian Empire. And this will be our last topic for Unit 3. All right. Following the dissolution of the Mongol power in Russia, which was the Golden Horde, the city of Moscow became the foundation for a new state, Muscovy. And this absorbed the territory of the former Kievan state, as well as Novgorod in the west, and it also conquered the Khanates of Kazan and Azarkhan. The Muscovite ruler was Ivan IV, and he took the title of Tsar in 1547. The natural direction for Russian expansion was east. Expansion in Siberia was led by armed adventurers who defeated the only political power in the region, the Khanate of Siberia, and took the land from small hunting and fishing groups of native people. Siberia was valued first for its furs and timber, and then as a penal colony. In the 1650s, the expanding Russian Empire met the expanding Qing Empire in Mongolia, Central Asia, and along the Amur River. A treaty between the two powers in 1689 recognized the Russian claims west of Mongolia. This was called the Treaty of Nerchinsk, and it was the first treaty between Russia and China, China under the Qing dynasty. The Russians gave up the area north of the Amur River, but their claims were also recognized. As the empire expanded, it incorporated a very diverse set of people, culture, and religions. And this could, and often did, produce internal tensions. The Cossacks belonged to a close-knit band, and they made temporary alliances with whoever could pay for their military service. So essentially, the Cossacks are mercenaries. And despite the fact that the Cossacks often performed important services for the Russian Empire, they maintained a high degree of autonomy within their own land. Threats and invasions by Sweden and Poland, and internal disputes among the Russian aristocracy, who were called the Boyars, B-O-Y-A-R-S, guys, make sure you write that down, in the late 17th century, led to the overthrow of the old line of the Muscovite rulers and the enthronement of Mikhail Romanov. The Romanov rulers combined consolidation of their authority with territorial expansion to the east. And Mikhail Romanov would become the Tsar in 1613. That's the early 17th century. As the power of the Romanov rose, the freedom of Russian peasants fell. And in 1649, Russian peasants were legally transformed into serfs. Guys, 1649, Russian peasants legally become serfs. Nobody else in the world has the feudal system anymore. And this is going to play a massive role in the downfall of the Romanov family in 1917. Again, we are all about connections here, y'all. All right. Peter the Great, absolute ruler. And he reigned from 1689 to 1725. He actually fought the Ottomans in an attempt to gain a warm water port on the Black Sea, as well as to liberate Constantinople from Muslim rule. He did not achieve either goal, however, but he was more successful in the Great Northern War, in which he did break Swedish control over the Baltic and establish direct contacts between Russia and Europe. Following this victory of the Great Northern War, Peter built a new capital, naturally called St. Petersburg, and this was to contribute the westernization of Russian elites, as well as to demonstrate to Europeans the sophistication of Russia. The new capital was also intended to break the power of the boyars by reducing their traditional roles in the government and in the army. Peter wanted to use European technology and culture to strengthen Russia, as well as to strengthen the autocratic power of his own government. He was not interested in political liberalization, but he was interested in advancing technology. As an autocratic ruler with absolute power, he brought the Russian Orthodox Church under his control. He built industrial plants to serve the military, and he increased the burden of taxes and labor on the serfs, which the Russian Empire depended on them for the production of foodstuff. He modernized the military, and he brought in new technology, actually by going undercover and learning these trades firsthand. All right, thank you guys for listening. That's our last podcast. If you have any questions, you know what to do. Send an email, post your questions on the classroom, reach out to each other. Have a great night, y'all. Cheers.